Just want to watch you play basketball with those kids.
Can I play? That's easy.
We expect to see you out there.
Be there.
Item 22, resolution in support of Invest 07.
Motion to accept.
We have a motion.
Me too.
We have a motion by Mrs. Breger and a second by the rest of the board. I see no discussion. Mr. Mason?
Yes?
Thank you. Motion passes. Item 23, amended final budget. I checked today and this document, because it's very thick, I didn't want to see if I could remember everything I read last time, and Mr. Weiler says that it has not changed since the last time we met and discussed it, so just as a note there. Mrs. Moulton.
Just one quick question on page 3 of 3, and I just didn't remember it. Reduction of anticipated remodel and modernization projects. What does that refer to? I probably should have called and given you advance notice on that.
This is, as you're aware, this is in the is in the capital program, and what we're looking at here is just a one-year look, the current fiscal year, and as you're aware, it's really a multi-year program. So
okay.
You'll see
so
fluctuations.
There's no really cut in it at all. It's
no,
still
ma'am.
there. It's just
No,
in this year program.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion for 23?
Motion to accept.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Moulton, second by Mrs. Breger. Mr. Mason?
Yes?
Thank you. Motion passes. Item number 24, approval
Motion
of
to
settlement.
accept.
Motion
Second.
by Mrs. Breger, second by Mrs. Moulton. Clear the board, please.
Oh, you know what? I keep thinking of doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Mason?
Yes?
Thank you.
Did
Item
Mrs.
number-
Moulton want to? Oh,
Oops,
there you
sorry.
go.
I'd done
That's
it.
okay.
I thought I heard the click. Motion passes. Item number 25 is notice of intent on regulation 2310. And I just have one question, but you can go first. Go ahead.
In extending this to $50,000, I thought the discussion was more like 25. Was I wrong? And is there a statute that drives the amount?
Madam Chair, members of the board, Mrs. Moulton, your recollection is correct. At the last board meeting, it was $25,000. Then, subsequent to that, we had a discussion at Cabinet where the amount was, we were going to propose to increase the amount to $50,000. The understanding, I believe, that the state is also looking to move to that level. There is no statute, to my knowledge, Mr. Hoffman, that covers an amount for a consultant. Is that accurate?
No, there's a bidding amount at 25,000.
Okay.
The relevance of a higher number is that what we're trying to do is to present the most meaningful consultant contracts to the board, and raising the amount to 25,000 only caused a reduction in the total number of referrals to the board by something like 20% or so, Jeff, I think.
25%.
Yeah.
But
And I guess my question is, in all honesty, the board has often found, I think, not often, but on occasion, concerns with some of the consultants. And so in raising it to 50,000, what percentage would we now not see, Mr. Weiler? If 25,000 decreased it by 25%, what does 50,000?
I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. I did run the numbers. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't want to give you I have a hunch.
And I have to tell you, in all honesty, I'd want to know that before voting on it this evening, personally. So, because if it's 100%, we never see those. I think that's not. It's not our job. I mean, we wouldn't be fulfilling our job, and so I would want to see that number before voting on it this evening.
Mrs. Moulton, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
On the, I tend to agree with Mrs. Moulton in reference to that, but don't we see those anyway? That we can ask questions in reference to that, or hold them back, or since we're going to get that information anyway, or do we not get that information and it is automatically done? Mr. Weiler.
That would be on the listing of purchase orders, as you see, that would be in the agenda that you see every
those little numbers that.
Well, yes.
And I have to tell you, in all honesty, I do scoot those, but I really look at the higher numbers and then go back and see what those are. So.
Could we not make them larger? Larger in the sense of bold print.
Well, we'd consider that.
Thank you for the clarification.
Then it'd be a lot more pages. So anyway, I would want to wait till I hear that statistic from you, Mr. Weiler.
Thank you, Mrs. Moulton. And my question was, I may be thinking of a different discussion that we had, but I thought we had a discussion also on finding out some kind of a standard in the education industry. What is the standard for a district of this size to handle that type of a typical agenda item where, where the break points are, kind of an average for large districts to make that decision, and perhaps if possible, their philosophy behind it, why they've chosen that break point. Is it because it drastically reduces the number coming to the board, or what the reasoning is behind it? And I didn't see that in the backup. So we didn't capture that. Did I remember that right? Did we say that? Because I remember somebody saying, yes, and it should be the education industry, not the business industry. That we were going to base that number on something.
I don't recall you saying, but if we're going to bring it back in 2 weeks, we can certainly check with the Council of Great City Schools and see what they have in their policy department that they recommend. A point I want to make is it's not that we don't want to bring these to the board. It's the lag time, and not to suggest that there's any inefficiency, but by the time you contact the consultant, do the negotiation, do the paperwork, and then we have, what is it, Cindy, about a 3-week, by the time we have to get it to Cindy to process for the cabinet to get to the board, we use up 3, 4, 5 weeks. And so it's a question of expediency. If there's some alternate way that we could provide, and we'll get the numbers first, I'm not suggesting you go ahead tonight, but if there's some alternate way we can provide the information as Mr. Mason has suggested, I guess we'd like to ask if you could see your way clear to look at that too.
And I guess my comment was that there have been, I can think of twice that consultants were accidentally overlooked in the year setting off, cooling off period, and it was really the board that caught it. And those are the kinds of things that are our responsibility. And so
I think we would, regardless of the amount, we would still bring all of the cooling off policy issues.
But they weren't brought to us.
I don't think we'd have a dollar limit on that.
And the point I think Mrs. Moulton's trying to make is they weren't brought to us as a cooling off item. They were brought to us as consultants, and we said, are they cooling off, period.
That's right.
So I think that's a good point. Maybe one of the things we could consider when this comes back is if we were to get an informational item as backup that lists the consultants and the dates they were hired and the amounts they were hired for, and then we might be more comfortable with that amount.
As part of our discussion at Cabinet, we did talk about quarterly reports, or even more often to the board of all consultants, just a listing and who they are and the amount. The other thing that we talked about is the need for a district-wide evaluation tool that is more comprehensive in nature, for consultants coming in. I also believe, we do address the cooling off now on the CCF 144. I don't know if at the time that the individuals that you said that you caught coming through the, the board items, if in fact that particular language was embedded on that form, I would not know that. Maybe Mr. Hoffman possibly would. But, we can also strengthen our system, the process, what we have in place, the paperwork that is to be completed prior to an individual being hired.
Thank you. Mrs. Scow, did you have a further comment?
I just had a question about Dr. Court-Ross. You said that the state was considering moving that. What was it, legislative? Is it law or the state board? Or
Well, that's a Bill Hoffman probably answer, but the state really doesn't have a law for professional services. It is really for the bid of hard goods, and there's going to be a movement to increase that from 25,000. I think they're going to go for 100,000. But that's all in the thinking stage at this point.
And this policy is any expenditure over 50,000. Correct?
Up to.
Is it totally consultants?
This specifically deals with the hiring of consultants. Okay. I think the school district is unique in the situation that there's lots of training going on, lots of in-servicing, lots of use of consultants to enrich a variety of things, staff development, what have you. And as the superintendent said, staff trying to make the arrangements to enter the contracts and then go through the contracting process and then to be able to notice things up to the board, we found ourselves frequently with just a few days before the contract was going to be let, or maybe sometimes a few days after the contract needed to be executed, and we still hadn't gotten board approval. So it's not an idea of avoiding the oversight of the board. It's the idea that we're trying to continue to do as much business as we can within the confines of getting the consultants in place and getting them to deliver their services, and still provide information to the board so that you can look and see how the money's being spent.
I can appreciate that, and I recall that discussion. My name is next up on the list, followed by Mrs. Barber. Mrs. Johnson's left the room. Just one other thing when you're talking about that, many of them, or a few of them, have come with accountability. For instance, from this we will see a 5% increase. And so when you're looking at the evaluation of that, when I see one with accountability like that, that's what's impressive. And that's what I believe should be on almost every one of them. Unless there's some reason why not, they should have that accountability built into them. And then your evaluation would be very simple. I know it takes a little bit more tracking, but then absolutely, when you come and you say we use this program and saw this kind of effect, then another region or another school can have that to look at, that record to look at. Okay, Mrs. Barber.
Some time ago, a concern that I had evaluating consultants. And did I get that? I don't remember. I did get it. Okay, because we have so many consultants that, and also the cooling off period, that started when our last superintendent started with the book company. And it was kind of ignored, and of course, like a lot of other things, we continue to ignore it. So it's sad that the rules do not apply to everyone. We don't ignore anyone. You know, if you were a teacher or a principal or whatever your status may have been, the ruling should apply to everyone who is involved. And that was not the case. And I called that to your attention, but until we learn to say these rules and regulations that we are making concerns everyone, not just certain people and certain positions. I think we need to be very careful with that. But it just goes on, and until this board works together and accept these things, we're going to still have the same problems, and we do have some concerns.
Thank you. Mrs. Brager.
I think one of the times where it's a challenge, doesn't the, when you're going for a grant or the federal funds, because their timelines just kind of all of a sudden you're going through the process, and then it's there. It's not that you can predetermine you're going to get it when you're doing a consultant from a school, and you could pre-plan that, but the grant is something you don't know till all of a sudden they say you have it. And so trying to come before the board for that, I think would be a challenge. I think we need to look at that and put some kind of verbiage that protects that part of it, the grants and the federal money, because it isn't always, it's pre-planned, but sometimes they tell you 10 days before and you can't get it to be a board item. So I think you need to be very careful when you do that, that you're not stopping staff from being able to go forward on some of those free type situations with grants and federal funds.
I think that point's well taken. All right, any other discussion? Then I believe we will see this come back. Dr. Rolfes, is that the plan? All right, we'll move to item number 26, monitoring report on EL1. Dr. Rolfes.
I'd ask Dr. Lee to come forward to make the presentation.
EL1.
Sure, this is fine. Chair. Okay.
You might be there for a while.
No.
You don't get to make a lot of your own decisions. Okay, and that's reference item XX.
Madam President, members of the board, basically all I wanted to say is that presented to you tonight are E1, E2, E3, and E4 as they were previously designed in the past to address academic success of children, essential skills, and responsible citizenship. The format of the information is slightly different. We hope that we have been listening and paying attention during the conversations. The E1 monitoring report essentially addresses the global statement, the global mission statement. The second is academics achievement with the superintendent's interpretation highlighting some of the achievements within the district. If you turn to page 4 of 33, I believe this is the section where we hoped, it's on E2, reference ZZ, 4 of 33.
Got it.
I passed. Yeah, I just thought I'd give highlights of each one of them, and then if we wanted to have...
I guess I'll ask the chair, do you want her to go through each of the
We could
1,
stop.
2, 3, and 4?
To me, I'd like to do 1, 2, and then proceed. So is there a motion for item number 26E1? Motion by Mrs. Janison. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Scow. Any discussion on the XX reference item? Seeing no discussion, cast your vote.
Is that a motion for in compliance?
Yes.
Is motion to accept?
Mr. Mason?
Mrs. Moulton, is that a motion to accept or to...
Yes, it's a motion to accept in compliance by Mrs. Janison, seconded by Mrs. Scow.
Yes.
Thank you. Cast your votes. Mrs. Barber, did you?
What is it again? I was
It's
signing
the
paper.
EL1, the Global Executive Statement on reference XX.
The motion was to deem it in compliance and accept it.
Let me see, I made some notes on these. I have it in compliance with exceptions. So, but I have that with several of them, so should I wait? I wanted to
No,
discuss this one.
no, maybe you could tell us your exceptions.
In compliance with exceptions, exceptions are a large number of the indicators of really means. And I don't know if it's just this particular EL1. They do not state what students can do. And those are the indicators. We look at what students can do. Do you want me to go on? But
I think this one is more of an overarching piece. I think what you may be talking about is, it's on the academic piece, right?
It's, yeah, it's actually,
I think reference ZZ would be the one.
ZC.
What do you think, ZZ? We're
Okay,
thinking ZZ
then I
is the one that would go to. So,
all right.
what number is that? Item 28. For item 28, then we'll come back to you for those comments.
Okay.
Okay. All right, if you want to cast your vote on just accepting the EL1, the global executive constraint, and that's those first 2 pages, reference XX.
I got you.
Do you want to look at it for a minute? Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. All right, thank you, Mrs. Moulton, for taking that. Item number 27, right? E1, global mission. Discussion and possible action. We have a motion or discussion, and this is reference YY.
Okay.
Mrs. Moulton.
Would make a motion to accept in compliance with reasonable progress, making reasonable progress. And that's what the statements or words that Dr. Carver has used in working with the ends and the compliance, is that it's not maybe necessarily in 100% compliance, but in making reasonable progress toward the statement, towards the end. And so that is my motion.
Okay, motion is to accept with reasonable progress. Do we have a second?
Second. Go ahead.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Cast your votes. Mr. Mason.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, item 28 is monitoring report E2 academic achievement and E2A academic achievements defined. And Mrs. Barber wanted to speak to that.
Okay. I would say in compliance with exceptions, and the exceptions are a large number. The indicators are really means, and we do not state what students can do, and that's when they are indicators. And number two, for years entering 07 and 08, there are no targets. There are no targets specified. The first target year is 07. It's a 3-year honeymoon. I have a problem with that, and I can't accept that. And one final note, the board, not the administrative staff, is responsible for indicators not being up to standards. We have never specified in any policy or regulation who will develop and who will approve indicators.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Barber. Do we have a motion for item 28? Or any further discussion? Mrs. Moulton?
What'd you say?
Oh. In compliance with
I had in
exception.
compliance
Oh, I'm
with
sorry.
exceptions.
I am so sorry, I missed that.
And,
Okay, do we have a second for that?
Question on the motion, Mrs. Barber?
yeah.
Can I ask a question in reference to that if a second is given, whose responsibility is to respond to that, or can we ask someone to respond now to the exceptions?
Well, actually, we talked about this over and over and over again on getting these indicators right and making sure that we have targets, that we have standards, and we for the years ending 07 and 08, there are no targets specified.
Well, then let me ask the question of Dr. Lee. Can you respond to the exceptions?
Okay,
Madam
do we get a
President.
second?
Okay.
Sorry, let me get a second so we're official, because I'll forget it. Do we have a second on Mrs.
Second
Barber's
for
motion?
discussion.
Okay, thank you. Motion and a second then. And Dr. Lee.
Madam President, members of the board, as far as the two statements made with the exception, large number of the indicators are means rather than what students can do, and then that they're 3-year targets. Essentially what we were looking at is a discussion that was held by the board and staff regarding indicators and whether or not, if changes were made, whether or not those changes such as establishment of empowerment schools, establishment of career and technical academies, establishment of a 21st century course, whether those changes and the impact of those changes might be felt within 1 year. And therefore there was a discussion of looking at progress over time rather than a year to year, looking at the progress year to year, but establishing targets that would be 3 years out, recognizing that change may take up to 3 years. So therefore, in 1 year you might actually see a dip, but by the second year you might see growth, and the third year you might see growth.
So the 3-year timeline, was that unanimous?
That was not something that was necessarily voted on. It was merely a discussion at multiple meetings that we had, that whether or not we would use targets that were necessarily 1 year at a time or allow for progress toward a target over time, with the knowledge that 1 year where you didn't make progress might not tell the whole story, but you would want to see it over a course of 3 years to see true change.
And those targets will be identifiable?
Yes, based on, if you take a look at page 4 of 33 on E2,
right.
Each of the statements are aligned to information or specific data for the past 3 years. So you see 3 years of trend line, and then you see a target that is for an 08-09 target. So that would be 3 years from now.
Okay, then the final question I have, why 3 years? Why not 2 years? Why not 5 years?
Why not yearly?
Basically, it was, again, the information was just taken from the general discussion that occurred over the past 3 or 4 meetings where we talked about progress towards goals, establishing activities or actions or strategic plans to change what was going on in the district, and how long you would expect to be able to see change from those changes made.
Right, and the consensus probably was, I'm assuming, that, I shouldn't assume, but the consensus was what?
This discussion, as I remember it, surrounded approximately 3 years, that you would want to give a change approximately 3 years to be able to see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. Mrs. Moulton?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying right now. If we saw those targets made individually or many targets made, would you then project out further that would increase next year when we came back in for the targets? We would see that those 08, 09 targets, I know what you're saying is an up and down a little bit, but wouldn't you always want to have your doing better than you did the year before?
If I understand, you said project out further. We wouldn't project out further. We'd ratchet up our goal.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Target.
So if you met your target, then it would be ratcheted up. For instance, on page 7 of 33, the national percentile for average standard scores, if we reached the 45, then next year when you came, the 08, 09 would stay the same, but it might go to 47 or something like that. Okay, that was one question. Under this, are you focusing on getting to 100% proficiency by the year 2014?
Well,
I can tell you what the answer should be.
I'll let Carlene answer that.
As No Child Left Behind says we should.
Pardon, Mr. Mason?
As No Child Left Behind indicates that we should.
That's right. That's right. And that's why I asked the question.
I think we'd rather go through the changes that will likely occur in the No Child Left Behind legislation at the hearings in 2007 before we give you a solid answer to that.
And I can appreciate that, but I have to tell you, and I know we're never going to get there, but I honestly believe that we will get into the 90th percentile in a lot of the things that we're doing. And when we do that, that will be success. We'll always have, I believe, 5 to 10% of the kids that will not. But so I asked that question and appreciate your honesty in your answer. I do just want to make a general comment. I see some wonderful things. Once I started reading it, I could hardly put it down because I saw the surveys coming through. I saw the arrows for the most part pointing up more than down. There were a few things that did concern me. I did have to call Carlene on a couple of questions, but she answered them on definitions and whatnot. This monitoring report now will go in the back of my policy manual, and it will also be taken when I'm asked to go to the public and tell how the district is doing. I think it very well registers the things that we're trying to do, and I think there were a few areas, like I saw decreases in the ROTC numbers, which someday when I have a lot of time I'll come in and maybe visit with you and maybe ask questions about why that has occurred. But for the most part, everything was on the rise. There were a few things that were down. How I would rate this is that meeting, again, reasonable progress. In compliance, meeting reasonable progress. But I know there's another motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Moulton. Mrs. Barber?
I would just like to state that I cannot vote on this. I need to know what's going on every single year. If it's 0.5%, we need that. So we'll know how the kids are doing. How do we know where our concerns are and our errors? But I'm just letting you know I cannot vote on this as it is presently. I think, again, I stated my reasons. I made myself very clear when I read this, and it was a lot of work put into this. But I cannot vote for it.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Mason, hang on just a second, please. Mrs. Barber, I had written down that you made the motion. Does that mean you want to withdraw the motion?
What motion did I make?
To accept with exceptions?
Oh, I did say with exceptions, and I stated my exceptions.
But you don't want...
But if these exceptions are not going to be recognized, then I personally will not and cannot vote on this.
So you're withdrawing the motion. I just want to make sure. I don't want to put you on record if that's not where you're comfortable. Mr. Mason?
That was the question I had.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lee?
Madam President, members of the board, I just wanted to point out, just for point of clarification, I don't know if it'll make a difference, but the intent was never not to provide information in 07, 08, 08, 09. The intent is that you would always see the trends as they go. So next year we would add a column that would have 708. You would be able to see a 3-year trend at all times. So you would be able to see in 07, 08 whether each of those numbers went up or down, as well as in 06, 07, 07, 08, and 08, 09. You would see the data for every single year and see the trend. The target is just a target that was identified for 3 years out. But you would always see every year's data. That would always be provided, without exception, no matter what year.
Okay, and the other concern I had, the indicators. These are not the most valid. Some of them aren't. There are some that are. Valid indicators. When you have means in here along with these indicators, I can't vote on this.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Barber. Mrs. Jannison?
Thank you. And I guess my question is, we just voted on EL 10 to make the amendment to add objectives into it, which would be on a yearly basis. So those indicators, which we are calling objectives, and Mrs. Barber, I'm not sure if you were in the room for that vote, but we did vote to add those in. So we should be receiving some type of objective of what's going to be achieved the next year from the superintendent every year as well. And then in the monitoring reports, it will be indicated. Is that, because I mean, that's what I thought I was voting on earlier with EL 10.
I think I was out of the room at the time, but
can I ask other board members, is that what your assumption was as well?
I think it'll help answer some of those concerns, having that addition.
what are you calling them, objectives?
Yes, ma'am, and that's what Dr. Lee had, and I believe you had stepped out, but she had kind of gone over the different verbiages on goals, objectives, and it seemed what, and I would call them indicators. She called them objectives, and I could understand that, but it was the same explanation. So it was voted on to put objectives into EL 10 under number 2 on a yearly basis, and so it would achieve those same goals that you are addressing right now regarding which indicators the superintendent is expecting the district to work on annually.
So this gives us a yearly, not a 3 years.
You're always going to see
an annual report. That's what I'm after.
And it would be annual, and it would be ahead. So you would know ahead of time what he's looking at measuring instead of getting it after it was measured.
And when would he give this?
It was actually put into, we put it for the, because of BSL 5, we put it in the second meeting of September, because that's what in BSL 5, when that would be reported to us. So it would be at the beginning of the school year.
As to our superintendents, what is objectives, as you're calling them, what
yes,
they are, and
for the school year, for the upcoming school year.
And Mrs. Barber, that may not make you comfortable to vote on this evening, but I think if we walk through that and see what it looks like on the calendar, I think maybe perhaps for a future issue it might shed a little more light on, I think, the direction that you were trying to go. So Mrs. Barber has withdrawn the motion. Mrs. Jannison, did I get you?
Oh, yes,
okay.
Thank you.
And we need to have another motion then on item number 28.
Madam Chairman, I would put a motion on the floor for discussion that we accept reasonable compliance on reasonable progress on E2.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion in 2 seconds. Mrs. Jannison and Mr. Mason. I see no discussion, so you can cast your vote on acceptance or compliance with reasonable progress. Mr. Mason?
Yes.
Thank you. Mrs. Barber, why don't you cast, oh, good, there you go. That way the board lights up.
I will not vote on it.
She's abstaining.
No, she said no.
No.
She's not voting. Okay, but the vote is cast by all those who wish to participate, so it passes, and we will go now to item 29, Monitor Report E3, Essential Skills. Dr. Rolfes?
I just wanted, as an aftermath, I know the hour's late, so I won't take any time, but I did want the board, maybe on your own time, to look at the the gain in the achievement gap, which is a major issue not only here but across the country. And while we certainly didn't make the gains we would like in the African American, we made substantial gains in the mathematics component for the Hispanic population.
Well, I think this is the one that I had the most problem with. I guess perhaps I'm just not reading it the way that it was intended, but to me the E3 skills aren't really, it seemed like the report was centered on the CTE program and what it's accomplishing and the opportunities it's providing, which I don't have any concern about how well that's moving forward. But I couldn't quite make the direct connection between how the essential skills listed on page 1 of 9 were really, we were able to reflect the direct correlation between that and the CTE experience. And so maybe, perhaps I'm just not catching that connection and I can be walked through it. Mrs. Moulton, do you have a comment?
And I can appreciate those concerns. One of the things that I really noted was the survey results. And I'm looking particularly on 3 of 9, the percentage of positive parent responses in the district up from 82.7 to 87.6 or 84. Many of them on the next page, page 4 of 9, final district results with the parents, the students, and the staff. I believe in my all indications were up, many significantly, except for 2 on the staff. The staff stayed pretty consistent, but I saw the students, for instance, school provides opportunities for being involved in making decisions. From 03, it's increased from 52% to 66.3%. Significant gains down in the offers extracurricular activities. So I was looking at the surveys as a good judgment call for those. In my own. I was on page AAA reference, page 4 of 9. And above it shows that the number of surveys had decreased slightly in some of the categories, but nevertheless I thought it showed survey participation.
Thank you. Mrs. Brager?
On that same line, whenever I look at that and you go from, 04, 05, 06, if you're able to do the same parents to see if they're having a difference in what they're seeing, it's just different people. So you really, to put them here to say you're up, you're down, you're up, is just the thoughts of those people that year, not what they gave you the year before, not to see where you're going. You can't get that out of this survey. So having previous years, you don't know what parents answered it last time to what parents answered it this time, and if they felt there was a difference or an improvement. It's kind of an invalid, it's a good survey, but you can't grade it on the previous year. Mm-hmm. It's different people, it's different criteria, it's different everything. So having that there, when you go from 82 to 79, isn't necessarily not doing as good of a job. It's just different people giving you an opinion. If you could keep the same 6,000 people or whatever, 1,200, and each year they took it seriously, if all parents really took it, you might have something, but you don't with this. So it's almost a policy that you can look at for only that year. Previous years doesn't really give you accurate information because it's different people.
Unless you can look at a longitudinal study, but
Anyway,
and I think if you look at the transiency rate in the school too, the school population, some of those schools will turn over dramatically, which would have that same kind of.
Yeah, and just to say, I don't mean, that's not meant as a negative by me, but it's just not, you're not able to go a 3-year study with the same 1,200 people and find out if they see the improvements or whatever they see. To me, yes.
Members of the board, just to address a couple of things. On the parent survey, we generally get approximately the same number, and I know that when I go over the whole survey in the spring, when we go over that in the summer actually, the parents come in usually at about 20,000 parents. But if you take a look at the numbers above, you can see that we have a very strong student response, as well as a very strong the staff response. So The only thing that I would say is, well, and I guess I shouldn't say strong, out of 30,000, I suppose that's not 6,000, is a significant number statistically in terms of survey response. But we do have a very high student response, and so I think that I don't know that you can actually say that they're completely different people all of the time. I would imagine that there's a core group of people that respond. So we don't collect the names on the parents, so I would not be able to. That's certainly something we could consider in the future, trying to track it longitudinally.
I'm not looking for more work from you. I just think that you can only, that year, you can base it on that year, because people leave and people come and go to different schools. But what's sad is when parents complain and you give them an avenue to give you information and you get 10%. How sad. And you have to put that back on the parents.
Can I just ask,
as far as I'm concerned,
Dr. Lee, what, I know statistically that there's relevance or percentage points that could differ. Could you share with us some rationale on how accurate you believe, as a statistician, that these surveys are? And I think you've shared it with us before.
I generally do. What, in terms of a confidence interval, we run this at about 95%. So I can tell you that if we were to run the same survey with the same group, 95% of the time, or 95 out of 100 people, would respond the same each time. And that's essentially what this is telling you. And that if you translated it to a larger population, that you still have a 95% chance that you're going to get the same information, even if you got a larger sample. So statistically, that information that I give you about confidence intervals and confidence levels, that's essentially what that's telling you. So I do believe that we have enough of a sample and information from each of the groups to be able to give you what I believe is valid information on a year-to-year basis.
And I didn't even want to, it wasn't about invalid or valid. It was just that it's...
it is different people, though. There is no guarantee that that is the same parent, the same...
I think you could just take it for that year and not, grade yourself against a year previously. And I think that's what's important, is seeing what they're thinking right then, because it could be different people. So I don't mean to belabor it. So I'm comfortable, and I think it's excellent to have information. I've always thought it was sad that out of, let's say, with 300,000 children, there's at least 150,000 adults that are hopefully watching over them, and to get 20,000 people is kind of sad. So, but that's society.
Just as a point of reference, the first year we provided a stamped, self-addressed envelope with it, and that gave us a whopping 3,000 extra.
Exactly. You have to go pick it up door to door.
Madam President, members of the board, I just wanted to address your question about if we focus too heavily on the career and technical. I believe the thought processes that we had were the section 1, students demonstrate the skills. What we took a look at is achieve personal goals, demonstrate interpersonal skills. We tried to use some of the surveys that are aligned, the questions within the surveys, to represent some of that information, so that you got the perspective of the parents and students and teachers regarding that information. We also provided scholarship information, specifically under the areas of taking initiative, that you would have to apply for a scholarship, and that would take some initiative. But number 2, which is demonstrate skills necessary for workplace, with the 3 sections under that, I believe that's where we really focused on the career and technical education and academies within the district, because that's been such a strong push with the new career and technical academies coming on board, as well as the other activities. So, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, but...
I'm sorry. I think it's kind of hard to differentiate, though, when you have parents who are taking initiative and when you have students who are taking initiative, because I think a lot of the students who come to our magnet programs and have great experiences come because their parents were looking for the best education options for them. So I think it's a soft number. I mean, I don't because there's some. I don't know that you'd be able to tell whether a student received a scholarship because they had someone working with them to identify those scholarships, or those students had gone out on their own, or we happened to have a great counselor in that high school that was able to identify a lot of scholarships and was really quite talented at that. And so a lot of those things vary. So I think that while these could credibility to whether or not they're taking initiative and doing some of those things. They're still pretty soft, and I know that it's kind of a hard thing to measure, but I guess I was disappointed in looking at the scholarships awarded, because for the number of students that we have, it's not a very high number of students who actually receive a scholarship. So it was just, and we've actually dropped in some of the subcategories. But I think that's interesting, and I didn't catch that was the connection you were making. The students were showing initiatives through the following measures and then getting the measures on. So if that's in there, I missed it, and that's my fault. But I don't know. It was hard to make the connection. I think perhaps, when we're striving for finding the ways to capture that picture of how well we're doing on those areas that are hard to measure, maybe you could just be black and white about it at the beginning of it and say, this is how we're measuring it, this is why we thought it would do that, so that I guess so that we're looking at it maybe through the same eyes as staff that's putting it together for us. Because that makes a big difference for me to know that the reasoning behind measuring that particular thing. Thank you. Mrs. Moulton. Okay, do we have a motion on item 29?
Motion to accept in compliance with reasonable progress.
A motion to accept in compliance with reasonable progress. Do we have a second? Second. I see no further discussion. Mr. Mason, would you like to cast your vote?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just a second for the votes to come up. Mrs. Barber, did you want to vote on 29, or did you want to not vote? Okay, the vote is in. Who pulls the board up? I don't know. Mrs. Barber's not voting, and Mr. Mason voted yes. Thank you. Motion passes. All right. Item number 30 is monitoring report E4, responsible citizenship, and E4A, responsible citizenship defined. Do we have a motion or discussion? Or do you have a statement, Dr. Rolfes?
Motion to accept with discussion.
Okay, do we have a motion? We have a motion to accept for discussion, and a second, Mrs. Brager, Mrs. Scow, and we'll go to Mrs. Scow for discussion.
I felt that the supporting data in this were excellent, probably the best out of all of the monitoring reports. I feel like the survey is so aligned with what we have in that policy, and to me it's just very clear that it's good evidence that it's in compliance. I just really appreciate those surveys, and I feel like it really gives a good picture of what's going on in those areas, and to have the questions so clearly aligned with this responsible citizenship. I think it is with the skills, but it doesn't seem like it's quite aligned as closely. So I felt this was a lot clearer, and felt that it was in compliance.
You felt that it was in compliance?
And this is hard. My motion is in compliance. And I think this is hard. This is a really hard one to find data for, and I think you've done an excellent job.
Thank you. Mrs. Jamison.
Thank you, and that was one of my questions. We get these reports from these students who come and all the incredible amount of work that they do in the community service. Do we know what students don't participate, and if they don't in a class or in a school in activities such as this in regards to citizenship? If they don't participate, are there things that we do to encourage them to participate? Or do we know that 100% of all of our students participate in these activities?
I would, Madam Chair, members of the board, 100% of the students are not participating in these activities, and I think what you see is a broadening of different kinds of programs and opportunities that are provided to attract and to engage students. Maybe I wasn't interested in the one particular one, but we see schools constantly striving to increase outreach to students to get them to participate, but it's not 100% of our students.
And I appreciate that. I guess the question is because a lot of it, you look at the students who might not participate in something like this, and there's probably going to be those that might have the tendency to drop out as well. So I guess I'm just trying to get to, if it's counselors, if it's teachers, if we know that those students aren't participating, do we make an effort to make sure? Because if we say that this is one of the things that we're trying to have every student achieve, I just want to see if those efforts are being made to reach out to those students who don't participate.
Excuse me. An example that comes to mind is at Las Vegas High School with their, and I cannot remember the name of their program that they're offering there, that they expect every freshman to be in. But the expectation is that every student will be involved in a particular club or activity, some sort of involvement at the school. So that's one school I'm aware of. I'm not certain if there are others, but you have schools that are taking those types of steps to really engage students in the activities that are being offered at the school.
I think that sounds like a great idea, maybe like a student council function to try to get, as a freshman, at least it's something that we can know that if this is what we're trying to get them to participate in, it probably the freshman year would be the year to engage them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Moulton?
Thank you, and just a comment on that Las Vegas High School one, where I've heard it really acclaimed is by the student council. They're the ones that go after the kids, which is peer-to-peer, which I have always said is a great strength. One of the things that I saw that was a little bit disturbing to me, I'm looking on reference BBB, page 5 of 11, and that is, you know, if we compare it to 02, 03, there was an increase in attendance, but if you look at 03, 04, 04, 05, there was a slight decrease in attendance, and I guess I was surprised at that statistic coming through, and concerned as well, because I would want to see that continually increased. Another comment that I'd like to make is this is the one that on page 7 of 11, a trend on the ROTC students, the number is even a little less than it was 02, but we saw a spike, and at some point in time I'd like to visit with somebody about that. Moving on to page 8 of 11, I saw great commendation, as Mrs. Janison mentioned earlier, for the Education Services Division. One of the concerns that I had at the bottom of page 8 of 11 is that during the 3-year period, on an average of 24% each year of increase of expulsion recommendations. And perhaps I'll make an appointment with Dr. Goldman to visit with about those. Although we're, you know, as a board, we're not seeing any or very many review hearings, but definitely that there's been an increase. Also, the number of days in September of 06, that timeline when a student was out of school has been reduced to 7.4 days, when in June of 04 it was 14.5 days. And so I think that they've definitely captured the direction of the board. So I too appreciated this information, although I do have a concern with the attendance rate.
Thank you, Mrs. Moulton. I had the same concern with the attendance rate. And then I had a concern about the sportsmanship award. It seemed like a wild card. It was like we had somebody win it, so we put it in there. I don't know if we measure that. I've never seen a sportsmanship initiative listed as an indicator before. So I felt like it was just kind of a bonus, not actually a measurement. The community service, the sportsmanship, and the storytelling festival didn't seem to have comparison data. Are those new indicators?
Yes.
And then I agree with Mrs. Moulton on some of the comments that she made about, I think page 9 of 11 on the ERB, or the expulsion process, the hearings. I think the processes have improved greatly. And I think what I need is to know how those processes determine success. The next to the last paragraph on 9 of 11 talks about the number of expulsions, but because we grow so much, I couldn't tell whether the number, I needed the percentages, and I thought Mrs. Barber had asked for that at one of the previous monitoring report sessions where we got everything by percentage, because sometimes if we just have 500 kids that got a scholarship this year and 600 the next year, we're actually not serving as many students. And so I think whenever there's a comparison, and there's several places in the reports tonight where I'm trying frantically to figure out whether I've got it right, because I have to know the number of kids we had in the school that year to figure out the percentage, and I don't always have that in front of me. And so I couldn't tell whether or not we had actually reduced the recommendations or not, or the expulsions as they were coming out of the schools. Has that gotten better or worse? Because I couldn't tell without a percentage number. So just some concerns, not so much about whether or not we're making progress, but whether or not we're reporting it so we can easily make those comparisons and things. So, and I did note that I thought the systems were really producing what we were trying to accomplish, and so some of those changes, I wish I could capture the data a little bit more accurately for myself, but I thought that the process is getting much better, so I think it was good in terms of that. Mrs. Janison?
Thank you. One of the questions, or a statement, Mrs. Moulton, because you were talked about with what Dr. Goldman was doing. I've been going out and touring some of these schools, and so one of the questions that I had specifically asked is, what happens to these students once they return? Because, you know, you're dealing with a population, because they got there in the first place, to like the Peterson Behavioral Center, and if you take that student and just put them back in, because it's an entirely different learning environment, it's much larger, and they're going back into that larger setting again. And I guess the response was that a lot of it depends on the principal and how they've got it set up. If they just throw them back in there, or do they work with the counselors to make sure that that child is going to do well back in that comprehensive setting. So I think that those are some things that Dr. Goldman had told me that they are looking at addressing, to make sure that they aren't just thrown back into it again, so that they don't end up back on a second time for an expulsion for some of these. So I want to throw that up because I thought it was an interesting statement that he had provided during one of my tours.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second, and I don't see any further discussion. Dr. Rost.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Mrs. Janison, I believe schools do work with students as they are transitioning back in from alternative school programs to make sure that they transition in and they're set up to be successful both academically and behaviorally. And then just one additional comment, back to a comment, Mrs. Johnson, that you made about the sportsmanship initiative. When you look at the NIA award, maybe what we should have done was better define it. For a school to be awarded that, especially 2 consecutive years in a row, is rather large, and they're looking at 3 categories for that award. They look at the GPA for all the varsity sports, so every kid involved in the varsity sports, the academic GPA. They look at if the teams, in fact, have been able to make it to the level of playoff, and then finally citizenship. They can have no deductions for citizenship, which means students and players and coaches cannot have been ejected from any game for any of the things. So it's rather large, and I just wanted to explain it.
I wasn't questioning whether or not it should be an indicator. It just seemed that it wasn't something we were tracking before.
Right.
And I didn't know if we were tracking it because it was good news, or because we were now going to start tracking that because it was a good indicator.
I would hope we would start tracking this particular one.
So that was my question, not that it wasn't a good indicator, but thank you for that explanation. All right, if there's no further discussion, then a vote on item number 30. Mr. Mason?
Yes.
The motion was to accept. Was it with any? It was just to accept, right? As I recall. Motion to accept.
Yes.
By Mrs. Brager and a second by Mrs. Scow. And Mr. Mason votes yes. Mrs. Barber, are you voting on this one? Okay, here we go. Motion passes. Thank you. And then we have item 16 that was carried over from the beginning of the meeting. Unless the board wants to hear public comment, these good people are staying with us a long time.
Can we hear public comment? Unless they want to stay till the bitter end?
They're saying yes. Okay, public comment.
Go ahead and do what you need to do. Okay, go ahead.
I don't think he's talking to us. Okay, let me find my sheet. Those who have called in to speak on non-agenda items is New Technology Devices, James Bell, followed by Track Changes, Maria Stevens. Do we have James Bell with us? Okay, as soon as he comes back in the room, would you let me know? We'll go ahead with Maria Stevens. Karen Gray. Followed by Rose Moore, unless we get James Bell back in.
Well, I was going to speak to the board on some expense reports, but I think I have something else I want to say. It's not nice, so I'm going to try to be nice about it. Tonight, when I spoke on agenda item 14, I specifically requested clarification of the corresponding backup material. I asked if we were going to be using the reference material in the agenda or the revised material that was put out front. The president told me that it would be between both materials, the discussion. However, when the item was opened, the president made a statement that the material to be discussed was the revised material that was supplied tonight. You have misrepresented to me what the backup material was going to be, not only myself, but the rest of the public. And I believe that this was a purposeful prevarication in order to interfere with my ability and the content of my speech and for the rest of the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Did we get James Bell?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Followed by Maria Stevens if she's here. Are you Ms. Stevens?
Good evening. Good evening, Superintendent Dr. Rolfus and the members of the board. I take this opportunity to thank you for this time to address to you. I am dispersing copies of my concerns to you in hopes for a documented response in a timely manner. I don't know how to give up.
Right here.
Thank you. My name is Maria Stevens, and I'm a parent of 3 children within the Clark County School District. I believe in collaboration between teachers and parents as method to encourage positive experiences for children during their school years. I am constantly devoting my free time through volunteerism and financial support, as well as maintain an active membership in the PTA. I am addressing this board this evening because I have several concerns in regards to the treatment of my child and the abhorrent occurrences that my young son and our family had faced. The distress and the pain that we have experienced has raised many questions with me, and as I have found, the uncertainty of other parents have expressed in regards to policy, procedure, and protocol of the Clark County School District. I will outline these topics accordingly, and I will provide a timeline of the incidents that had taken place. There are 4 major concerns that I will be discussing, but because of the time limit, you will have your own copy to refer to for other matters. First concern, parent engagement. I make myself available to the parent involvement in all 3 of my children's education. However, I have now taken the perspective that I have been disillusioned of what I thought collaboration and participation would be in the environment of a learning institution. As I have mentioned before, I have dedicated many hours of being on the PTA as well as given my support financially to the school. I am requesting the belongings, in requesting the belongings or reimbursement of the money and the materials donated, I have received an insulting letter that had left me quite disgusted. The person who have written the letter assumed that I wanted my money back for tissues and paper towels. The amount of tissues and paper towels could never compare in price value to the minimum wage time that I have volunteered. That would have equaled at least $4,320, as I estimated. My second and more upsetting incident happened in October of this year, when my child fell off the school primary apparatus during recess. It was only because of my duty and attention to my child that I discovered a hematoma or a bruise on his buttocks. As a certified OBGYN in the Philippines, my expertise lead me to monitor the recovery process of this fall, which had taken a week. When I brought this to the...
I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, and I apologize, I didn't explain the time limits before you started speaking, so that is my fault, I apologize. You've given us a detailed package of information, and I'm reading through this and seeing that you have concerns about the security of the school when a child may have been locked out, when you had a zone variance request and a request for a track change, a number of issues that we don't have an agenda item for tonight, which is why you ended up to the end of the meeting to speak to us, but we can have someone talk to you right now about addressing some of these issues. And we'd be happy to do that, but...
Can I have at least 1 more minute? Because I'll just go jump, since you have copies of my concerns, and I have attachment with like a timeline of the series of events. I would just like to...
Can you just point to us in your written material where you're going to be speaking to, and then we can review that and make sure that we get you the assistance that you need to resolve the issues?
Sure, because I have like I could jump my questions like towards the end of my written concern.
Right, and we see those questions listed there on the third page.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Mrs. Jennison, I think, had a question for you.
No, I was just going to ask, I'd give her more time to speak.
Okay. All right, you've been recognized for more time, but we do have this in front of us. Is there something that you would like to tell us in addition to what we have in writing? What are you hoping to accomplish this evening?
I would like to come to you so I could have a written response to my concerns, like regarding like the 6 questions, and I would like it to be in writing.
Okay. We can ask staff to take that packet and respond to those questions. Is that okay? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. We'll take care of that right away.
All right. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you for waiting for us. James Bell. I apologize, Mr. Bell.
First of all, thank you for letting me have a few moments here with the school district and say something. Basically, I'm a graduate of UNLV, the School of Education, and when I was at, well, first of all, how many minutes do I have?
3.
Okay. While I was at UNLV, I paid attention to what I was learning, and I actually have come up with my own teaching tool that I found that made this for special education in particular, but I found that many students in the regular classroom that are a little slow could use this as well. I've given you each one of these, someone put in the back room somewhere, and I have one from Ms. Kohut Rost also, one of these. And basically, it's pretty self-explanatory. I made something that some kids didn't pay attention to the lessons because pencil and paper weren't working with them. As I've heard this evening, some students are not doing very well because of some reason or other. I found this is a way to help them do better. Lights. Okay. And it's supposed to be flat on the table. When they're doing their worksheets, you are correct. It's a little something to make it fun to do their work. I've had from it fantastic success. Do we want to see this too? My assistant, please. Yeah, come over this side. Let everybody see what we're doing here. This is a new educational. Pick one. 2 times 5 is? You are correct. A little something extra for the classroom. I've been using these when I was teaching different classrooms, special education, phenomenal success, and Miss Jackie Allen came to the MEGA conference in Henderson, and she purchased a dozen of these for some schools. So the Clark County School District's already using these, and I just wanted to make it known for everyone on the council to know that these do exist, they are being used, and it is helping education. Any questions? And that's pretty much it.
Mrs. Jennison has a comment.
Okay.
You have applause back there, Mr. Bell.
Pardon me?
So you received applause back there.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to acknowledge, because Mr. Bell actually came and joined the Lummis PTA. And so he came to our PTA meeting and made the presentation. And I have to be honest with you, because of the time constraints that you had tonight, it wasn't as, we received a much better presentation at the Lummis PTA, so I apologize for just the 3 minutes. But he did bring one for each trustee to be able to donate to the school of their choice. So he had given one to our school, and then he's given one to each one of you so that you could donate it, just so they can try it and see if they liked it. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. And they are sitting in our conference room right here, so the board members can take them as they go. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for patiently waiting with us. Public disclosure form, Rosemore. Is she out in the hallway? Has anybody seen her? I can't remember. She was here. And Loretta, oh my gosh, Loretta and John. Can you give me your last name so that I don't murder it? Keek? You're up next. This is for Patricia A. Bendorf Elementary School.
Yes.
I think he's helping one of the last parents. I'm sorry.
Would
you like us to ask him to step in? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Elizabeth, is that okay? Thank you for being so patient with us.
Oh, it's okay. It's been interesting. I wanted to get involved. Hey, I got something.
Mr. Oxberger, do you want to go ahead with your remarks? Did you have anything this evening? Okay. We have one other speaker, Caroline Rangan. Do we want to go ahead with that? And then we'll be right back up with you as soon as we get the superintendent in the room.
Good evening. Susan Brager. Congratulations. Those of you who may not know me, my name is Caroline Rangan. I sit on the committee of Clark County Parents United. I also sit on the state board of the National Federation of the Blind. I also sit on the board for the National Federation of Parents of Blind Children and some other committees. That's boring anyways. I'm here for 2 reasons, actually 3. It's on the MGT audit. Under the special ed, the cuts that could happen, we do need more funding to keep up the autism area. I want to let you know that we can't afford cutbacks on staff and programs. Our children are already shortchanged enough as it is. The board doesn't understand what it's like to be a parent of an autistic child, the grief and the hope that your child will be like everybody else's child. Or being the parent whose child is in a home program and you are being evaluated on your performance as a teacher and as a parent, which makes one wonder why the superintendent's evaluation on performance happens every so many years. We have teachers who are learning as they go, who have never taught in special ed. They don't have experiences needed in the special ed area. There are not enough supports for these teachers and for the staff who look for the help and for the necessary tools. They have no idea on how to implement the IEPs or how to write down and reach goals and benchmarks. We are number 4 in the nation on OCR violations, much in part due to what I had just spoken about. We don't have teachers or the experienced teachers that we can attract while we're at the bottom. We have administrators and faculty who have no experience as doctors and who are practicing medicine without a license. So our children are not getting the right services, and they should be receiving under the federal law. We have staff being retaliated against for reporting and speaking out about things that are happening and that are being brought against the children. Under our own policies and the law, we have to report. Retaliation is not far behind after you report these incidents. Some even lose their jobs. I have been a witness to this. You can't follow the guidelines under the federal law under the visually impaired. I have a pamphlet here. But those are the federal mandated guidelines under the visually impaired. I'm sorry. The federal law mandates that if a child with a visual impairment, and if the parent wants them to learn Braille because their vision impedes on their education, they have the right to learn Braille, and that is not being taught in this district. We are far behind. And that is really, that's a bad thing, because these kids are going through school not learning how to read and become adults out there that can't read because they can't read Braille and they can't see the print. You see, I'm a parent who has experienced all these things that I've spoken about. My son is not receiving his services. The district refuses to recognize his diagnosis. He is autistic. He has Asperger's. He's visually impaired. He has a traumatic brain injury. He has OCD, and he also has 22 seizures a day. He was pulled out for his own safety, and he can't handle a full schedule. See, the system failed my son. It's failure to identify. His doctors have pulled him out, and the district refuses to accept the 5 applications that his doctors have put in for homebound. You see, I would be here to fight for my son, for staff rights, and for the parents and the community, which brings me to my next issue, retaliation. During election time for a board's post, a comment was made and asked of Mr. Ruffles during a board meeting. And she wanted to know what the policy was on CCSD employees after hours when they get involved in political issues and back another opponent. What could be done? I would like the written response Mr. Ruffles had forwarded to the board, and I would like that sent to me if at all possible. Does freedom of speech ring a bell?
Are you ready to summarize?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
I know that what retaliation is, and I hope to whomever the comment was addressed to will carry on, because we all have rights. I believe I've touched on EL10, EL4, E2, GP2. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes public hearing on non-agenda items. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. After all that wait. Oh. Tell us your name again.
Yes, John and Loretta Keek. We have 4 children in the school district, one at Las Vegas Music Academy, Lawrence Junior High, and 2 at Patricia Bendorf. The first 2 schools, I have just absolutely nothing but great things to say about them. The school staff, the teachers, everybody, just very, very great, and appreciate it. The latter is not the case. We joined the PTO this year, first time, due to teacher begging us to get involved, lack of supplies, them coming out of their own pockets with having to buy paper, buying copier toner, numerous other things. My wife became PTO president this year. Following the bylaws, we performed an internal audit. At the time the audit was done, the audit failed miserably, which was just the tip of the iceberg. The taxes of the PTO hadn't been paid in 2 years. The insurance has lapsed. The charter has lapsed, which probably in the surface wouldn't be a big deal to you guys because it wouldn't be involving you. But the fact of the matter is that in this situation, it does look like the principal of the school for the last 5 years has complete rule and reign of the PTO, has had every dollar basically controlled. The school staff has been paid by us, you, to do PTO work during school hours. This has all come out. This is an ongoing situation from 2001. The parent involvement is nil. There's nothing there. As far as misappropriation of funds, there are strong views of that to be, as of 2001 to present. You've got a $30,000 to $50,000 cookie jar sitting on the principal's desk every year. That's a lot of money. And for the teachers to be crying that they don't have workbooks for the children and don't have paper and don't have toner and can't use the copiers that the PTO has bought for them because they're assigned so many copies per year or per month is unacceptable. Since this has come to a head, we have followed change of command through Southwest region, basically giving them all the information that I'm giving you.
All the documents.
All the documentation, okay? I think that it is absolute mistake for any administrator of a Clark County school to have rule and reign over PTO to that extent, to have a husband or wife's name on the checking account. It's not proper. It should never have happened, and it is way out of line.
And it's not being addressed.
Hasn't been addressed. We have an ongoing situation where, you know, there's a investigation at hand, but that investigation has been taking quite a while, and I know things take time. But over the last 5 years, you guys have lost 25% of your teachers every year at that school.
Thank you. All right, we will.
Go ahead. Just finish.
Okay. Oh, and is she up next? Okay, you're up next.
I'd just like to finish it off with, you know, I went into this whole PTO thing thinking that, you know, I'm gonna do the right thing by the teachers, because the teachers kept complaining. And long story short, I really agree with Ms. Barber tonight. What you said, a lot of things about is the rules and regulations and the policies and the things that you guys establish across the board. They're not following the rules. No one seems to follow the policies. And there is no exception to the rule when it comes to this Bendorf Elementary School. And it's not about a personality trait. That's the way it's turned out. Oh, it's a personality problem between me and the administration. That is not the case. And we have file folders of things that even Patricia Bendorf has come forward to the board in 2001, and I'd like to know why it's not being addressed. The namesake to the school is basically not welcomed, and that's a fact. And I'd like to know who is going to be accountable for this. Who is going to be accountable?
Thank you.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Just okay. As far as the testing, okay, and I've sat here all night and I've listened to you talk about scores and testing and all this, and you know, I understand that you have to have benchmarks. You have to have something to go by. But if you have an administrator that is teaching or telling their teachers to teach to a test, what good are those numbers to you? I'm an HVAC technician. That's my profession. I could take every one of you and put you in a 3-day course if I had a test, and you could all pass that test. Does that make you HVAC technicians? No.
Oh, she said yes. All right, thank you. All right, on item number 33 is response to public comment. Mrs. Jansen.
Thank you. And Mr. Q, I just have a couple questions. First of all, I'm the president of my elementary school's PTA, so I don't really know a lot about a PTO.
I didn't either until this year.
Well, but my question is, because the PTA is a national organization, so we have some people that we can go back to. We've got a state PTA that can back us up, and we've got a national PTA.
Yeah.
Do you have anything with the PTO?
No.
So you've no recourse through that.
There's nothing national.
No recourse.
No recourse
Nothing.
at all.
Have you filled out a public concern form
We've
on?
gone to the Southwest District with everything that we had in black and white, in form.
So you have filled out the public concern forms?
Basically, since this has come out, my wife has been threatened to be 86'd off the property by the principal.
And I'm sorry, sir.
And it's just,
But you did fill out a public concern form that has gone,
it went through Southwest.
Yeah.
Mrs. Chan.
we
went through the protocol of
Mrs. Berger represents
chain
the
of
school.
command.
Perhaps she would have
All
some
right, I'm just, that was just my initial reaction, so I'm sorry. Didn't mean to step on your toes. I'll let you.
No, you're not. You're
Right.
not. Sometimes we just don't know there, and we've discussed this, and I don't want to, if they ever want to speak, I'll press my number at the end. Go ahead. No, that's fine. I'll just share what's some of the things that's happened. Okay. We did meet after quite a bit of time had gone by because it did not come to a trustee. Actually, they had actually called, and I'll be perfectly honest, Carolyn Edwards. And Carolyn called me out of respect for the fact that I still sit in District F. And so we met, and it doesn't happen overnight. I was brought in very late in a process that had been going on. I know that the Southwest region is working on it. I spoke with Mr. Hoffman in regards to the issue, and people are welcome to come here. I think that's fantastic. That's your right as parents. And there's a lot of issues that they have not shared because of our time allotments, for one thing. But I believe that it is being worked on. I believe it's looking in. I think you are welcome at the school. There are some things that they would prefer you probably didn't do when you went there, but I know that you can go to the campus. I know that factually. So it's a whole process, and parent concern forms are very important, and it is still being, and I will continue to work on it because I have not, just, we don't kind of, actually, we really don't have, and I don't mean it rude, I will call you again tomorrow, I called you today. So there are always, and I think there's three sides to every story, and we said that in the meeting, because there's yours, there's the schools, and then there's a solution to the whole situation. Lots of things get solved by having dialogue, and I think dialogue is very important. And I'm happy to listen to the whole board, but there is a lot to the whole situation that's being looked into, just so you know. And I'm happy with any questions, but legal has been involved in the situation, and Southwest Region is working on it. And it is, unfortunately, our timelines never make anyone comfortable, even ourselves sometimes, because there is more to the process, especially in a personnel issue, than the legalities of being able to just go out and tell you everything at this point in time. So I think as time goes on, and I don't mean a long time, that I think that you will get answers and there will be some resolves to the issues that took place.
Well, one little quick thing. With the issues that the teachers had, which that's what we're here for. We're trying to keep teachers. That's what the news has been saying, that we can't seem to get teachers and keep teachers.
And we can appreciate that.
Okay, and we're losing 25% out of an elementary school. Something's wrong.
And we did hear that. So
red flag.
If you will,
and all of a sudden,
if you will try to,
if you will try to be,
excuse me for just a minute, if you will try to be a little bit more patient, because I know it feels like a long time and you're in, because you didn't come to anybody right away. There was things that went back and forth for a long time on your timeline.
This has been since 2001.
You know what, sir? Not your issue has not been 2001.
No, but everything.
We're not talking about that. We're talking about your issue
now.
And I would like the time to be able to continue on that.
And I agree. And the good thing out of all this, I guess she found money somewhere, because now the kids have books.
Okay.
And they have
well, and that is,
is
everything is going to be taken through the proper channels to make sure that it goes right for all the students at that campus. So do know that you have been heard, and the rest of the trustees may anything they have to say.
Thank you. Mrs. Jansen, were you done? Okay. Mrs. Barber?
I would like to know if the people over Southwest area, if you received any information on this. You have. The person that the school is named after, we share the same person who does nails. And I've been hearing things for long before I think Mrs. Wallace came here about this particular school, but I can't get into those concerns. But it does concern me that this type of thing goes on and on and on. I've been hearing things for the last several years. I don't know if we have a new person or the same person. It's the same person. And is the person at school is named after, is she able to come to the school? I know she had some concerns and she talked with me about it, but she doesn't. And that saddens me. It saddens me that if a person has had a school named after him or her, and they don't feel good about the school. It's not that they're going to come in and run the school, because I wouldn't permit that either if I were the building principal. But I guess I get very concerned when we have, and we have this not just in Southwest, it's not in one section. We have it in some schools that I am very familiar with, where parents and little kids, now that's when I get really disturbed, are being sent home in a police car. I have a problem with that. I wouldn't want to ride in a police car as old as I am, unless it's for safety reasons. But to think of a little kid, what that child is going through, and it definitely concerns me. I personally cannot deal with that, but I think this needs to be looked into, Mr. Superintendent. We really need to look into this. And I think the sooner either we look into it and we need to make changes if everything gels. I don't know, but I get calls not from this particular school. It's just that we share the same person who does the nails, and I see her frequently, and I knew she was not happy at the setting. The other thing I want to talk about is Mrs. Reagan. As far as autism, do we have children that are not being served properly? How do we deal with this? I had, I think it was autism children that they need the same love and care and a part of the school. And we as principals had to make that possible. I went in and read to the kids, and I can remember it very vividly. And I like to read. I wear my little Red Riding Hood outfit. And they just sat and looked at me, and I kept talking. I read and I read. I didn't read the complete booklet, but they just had the same expressions. And I was having a hard time, really, because they were so sincere about you reading. They loved it. And then I got ready to go. I said bye-bye, and they just still looked at me. But I have a problem when any kid is not being treated the way that he or she, I don't care what their condition is. I have taught special ed, and I know how it goes. I had a student that told me once, we had a substitute yesterday, Mrs. Barber, and I said, really? I know you were very polite, and you listened to her, and you did what you... I didn't like her. I said, well, why didn't you like her? She said, because she was black. I said, well, I'm black. She said, I thought it was something about you I didn't like. And I got this in writing. I'm in the process of putting books together. And I didn't get upset with that kid. And I talked to her mom, and I fought for the kids. I got in trouble. I will not sit in any school. I was a teacher at that particular school. And they were sitting there. The principal had made some remark. I wanted the kids to participate in the school program, the little music part. And it was almost a battle, because he made a remark, and it didn't sit well with me. And I did not sit there and accept it. I don't accept nonsense when it comes to kids. I don't care who it is or what it is. It bothered me. And I proceeded to tell him that this music teacher, either you get it straight or I will go to the news, and I will. And it bothered me to the point, I work with the kids, but these kids are there for also learning as much as they can learn as far as subject matter. But they need to be a part of the school.
Absolutely.
And I said, can they just learn one song? Because I work with them. And they were so tired, but their parents were so thrilled. They brought them out that night. They were all dressed, and they were like sleepy. They were exhausted. But the point I'm making, they were a part of the school, and that's when I go bonkers if they do not feel a part of the school. And I'm in and out of my classrooms, and I want to make sure. And I'm in and out of schools now, And I see things that are going very well, and some, I see some things that disturb me greatly.
This evening I had brought four parents that had brought...
Hang on. This isn't an agenda item for us, so we can't actually engage in a discussion.
That's
While
fine.
I appreciate
she had asked a question, and
I wanted to
like
just
to
check, can we engage in this discussion at this time?
I think we might be going a little far afield from what the open meeting law contemplated for the public comment session. So you already had public comment session, and I understand that you feel like you're responding, but it's not properly noticed for this extent of a consideration.
Could you respond to Mrs. Barber after the meeting? Would that be okay? Since she
So are we
offered the
violating
questions.
an OML? Is that what you're saying? Because we violate a lot of OMLs. I mean, it didn't.
Well,
we do not.
To the question that Ms. Barber had asked me is how that these children are not being identified. I can tell you really super fast how it's going on, and it's going on with these SIP teams because they are not experienced. That goes to my...
Excuse me. Thank you. Let me just take a pulse. Okay. Does the board want to engage in this conversation further? Do we want to move on? Do we want to invite Mrs. Rangan to offer her comments to Mrs. Barber or in writing? Or if the board wants to hear the response, that is absolutely fine with me. I'm just responsible for making sure that we're running in a smooth manner. So just a kind of a pulse of the board. Do we want to continue along the lines of this discussion? We'd be happy to hear Mrs. Rangan's remarks, or do we want to try not to get close to the open meeting law violation that is potentially here and choose to continue this outside the meeting where you could speak with Mrs. Barber one-on-one? And I'm just taking a pulse. So what's the desire of the board?
Well, my pulse is normal right now, so.
We're glad.
We are
so. Would you like
to follow the law or not follow the law?
Are you not following the OML, Larry?
If you hear a flush, that's the AML going down. So, but just to let you know that if I have to get up and
leave.
I know, you're just around the corner. We could come visit.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mason.
I think legal had a good point. I believe legal had a good
attorney.
point.
Okay.
That's just my opinion, but.
As you know, you can't anticipate everything that will come up at public comment. So all the governing bodies, not just this board, are admonished to be careful about that. You're required to have public comment. And I think it's appropriate in the responses to public comment if you direct individuals up to an appropriate staff member, or if board members have concerns, that they direct an appropriate staff member to bring an item back on an agenda so that you can discuss it further under the open meeting law. But much more than that is problematic.
Okay, and I'm looking at the board and seeing a nod towards taking the legal advice. And so while we appreciate the information that you have, and if you feel like it's pertinent to what we do and what we need to know, please submit that to us, email us.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I was just addressing her.
And I appreciate that, and I'm so sorry to cut you off. I didn't mean to be inappropriate with that. Thank you. And I appreciate the passion for caring for students like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, Mrs. Moulton.
Thank you. Just a question of Dr. Rolfus and Mr. Hoffman. There was a response given to me when I expressed a concern over a meeting was that response confidential? Or there's a public member that's asked that they see that response?
I'm drawing a blank right now on what your question is.
On a candidates' night that was held, and I asked you to investigate the actions of that, and you sent a memo. I don't know if that memo was confidential or not, or if that could be...
We do a lot of investigations.
I know you do.
That particular matter has been referred for further inquiry by the Chief of Police, and so I think you received an interim response which kind of laid out some of the legal issues.
Was it given to all board members?
Was it confidential?
It was, yes.
And was it issued as confidential?
That document, was it?
I believe it did have
I don't recall. It may well be. I think that it's an attorney-client discussion because it highlights issues that I'm sensitive to, and I wanted to make you aware of them. They may or may not be relevant, so I think they're confidential. So that's
I think it's
relevant.
interesting then that there are people in the audience that know that, and so, and I certainly would never accept any kind of retaliation, even where that investigation goes. But I do think it's interesting that email has been shared with other people other than the members of this board, if an audience member tonight brings it to our attention, as was done.
I didn't take that from the comment.
Well, I'm sorry, maybe, I don't know if anybody else interpreted it, but I thought I believed, and I will talk with the individual later to see if that's was the case, but that's what I believe to be the case, is that they had realized that a response had been issued by Dr. Rolfus via yourself, and that I would be surprised that it should have gone any further than the board. But I'll check the note.
Correct.
And then I will make the statement on retaliation that it would absolutely be unacceptable that any retaliation, and I know that, as you stated, the investigation is continuing.
Yeah, and Mrs. Moulton, I need to agree with you completely that any sort of retaliation would be something I'd be very sensitive to, and I would react very strongly to learn that anyone was the victim of retaliation, especially on something that I was handling. And I can tell you that that I don't think that memorandum has been released to the public. But number two, if it has, it did not contain any information that would enable anybody to make any judgments or even to retaliate, because the topic is not included, or that a person is not included in that discussion. I think I was very careful about that. So I agree with you. Retaliation is a problem, and I'm fairly certain that that's not the case that we have here.
Well, I would like it looked into to see if that memo went further than the 7 board members. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Moulton. We're now on item number 16. Mrs. Barber.
First of all, I would like to say when I arrived at the board meeting tonight, I was in a very good mood because I love Christmas, and I was just feeling gung-ho. I was approached by one of my board members if I could take this item off the agenda. I said, why should I? I am seriously concerned as to why I had to wait to the very end of this board meeting to discuss my particular item, and I don't get it. So I'm going to let you know I am seriously following through on this. I am not accepting that. You do not just put me at the end. I'm not at the end for anybody. I'm sorry. I am so angry, and you need to know that, Mrs. Johnson, President, and Mrs. Moulton, who approached me. I am very bothered that ever happened. You know, came in, I even softened items that I was planning to discuss, but I'm just going to follow through. I could call a press conference, or I can call the Attorney General's office, which I'm either going to make file an OML. You know, there must be some rules or some laws that this is not acceptable. You know, I'm very tired. I came here half sick, really. I took a flu shot, and evidently it's taken advantage of me. I don't know. I haven't felt well, but I don't like what happened, and I don't want it to ever happen again. I don't care who is the president. If Bush was here, I'd feel the same way. I am very bothered that you pulled that. And for you to come to me, Mrs. Moulton, I don't like it, and I don't hide my feelings. When I get upset, I am upset, and I am very upset. You waited, and I really didn't feel like saying. I came because I thought I'm in a good mood. I would like to just say my little 10-cent speech. I softened what I was going to say, but let me just remind you, some of the things you're doing as the board president is not acceptable. It is not acceptable when you're doing all these different things, and I'm just going to do what I have to do. But don't make me last. Whatever you do, I am not that kind of person. I was item 16, and I waited, and I tried to stay focused, but don't pull that with me.
Mrs. Barber, I know you have further comments that I think you're intending to make, but the motion at the beginning of the meeting that placed 16 at the end of the meeting was a motion made by the board, and it was a unanimous vote, if I recall.
Well, didn't
And so
you think you would have the votes?
voted. You
know
voted.
You got the votes, so why did you do it?
Oh,
I don't like it.
I didn't do
And
anything.
I am sorry, I can't accept it.
The president does not make motions.
I'm going to file a suit with the Attorney General, ethics, anybody else I can file it with. I am sick and tired of you and you. You need to stop it. You do not control me. You do not control this board, and it will stop. And I want you to know my feelings. Who do you think you are? Where do you get all this authority? You even changed one of my agenda items, wrote it over, gave the contact. I don't like that. Enough is enough. Stop it. I'm begging you to stop it, or it's going to be more serious than you think. And that's straight from my heart. I am sick of it.
Well, let's hear it this evening. We've got an agenda item on it.
No,
Let's hear your thoughts
hear
on
it
it.
this evening. You don't call on me when the last person. I don't accept it, and I can't get ready for it. Don't ever do that to me.
You agreed to it.
I did not agree to it.
What was the motion on the adoption of the agenda?
I did not agree to you.
We had two
this.
failed motions, and then we had a motion to move it to the end, and what was the vote?
No. I just waited. Don't pull
The motion passed, and we worked by a majority vote of the board.
You got the majority vote, Mrs. Johnson. You've had it for years. The three of you, and sometimes four of you, and sometimes five. Think about it. But when I don't like something, you will know it, and everybody in town's going to know it. I'm not going to sit here and accept this BS.
Well, Mrs. Barber, because the agenda item, may I speak now, please?
Sure. I'm polite.
And I hope to do that uninterruptedly. The agenda item was directed at me, and let me say that after 10 years of this, I've developed a pretty thick skin for most things. There's been things that I don't agree with that the majority's voted on, and there have been things that I've been very privileged to be a part of where we came together as a team and made great things happen. And I am perfectly fine with any member of this board having a concern with anything that I do, whether I sit as the president or as I sit as a member of the board or any other capacity as a committee member or anything else. And I have great respect for the people that I work for and that I work with.
No, you don't.
I apologize. I thought I was going to be able to make a comment.
No, you don't put me last. I don't know who you think you are. You're just another board member.
Yes, I am, and that's the point I'm trying to make. I am a board member, and I have had the agenda used as a tool in order to pinpoint something about my behavior that does not have merit. And I'm willing to accept that, but this is the comment that I'd like to make. I would hope that the board would not allow the agenda to be used in such a manner in the future for anyone, for any purpose, for any agenda that's personal, that does not work in the best interest of children. Our agenda is to conduct the business of this district as we are governing trustees. And I hope that it remains a tool for us to do that. If there is a concern about my behavior, I would hope that Mrs. Barber or anyone else on the board would have the professional courtesy to call me and allow me to respond to that in a manner that's one-on-one, rather than a public meeting where I'm expected to be ridiculed and allegations made against without having an opportunity to respond in a manner that would be professional and dignified. And so when I received my agenda, and it had the backup for item number 16, and that backup they were emails that I had sent in an effort to serve the board well. And that is all that they were ever intended to do. And I think that Mrs. Barber has taken those and made an opportunity for herself to have the ability to make a statement that has no foundation. Because I am very, very careful about the way that I do things, and because I know that we're under complete scrutiny for the open meeting law and other Nevada statutes, I'm very careful to never endanger the board. And so, Mrs. Barber, thank you. I ask Mrs. Miller to put in writing her response as to whether or not the backup material satisfied any concern over open meeting law or ethics violations. And so I have for you this evening, because my good name and the name of my family is at stake.
What
I
is
don't
that?
break the law. I don't intentionally do things to hurt other people. I don't try to lead us down a path where we were never intending to go. My job this year has been to work for the board, to serve this board in a way that helps us accomplish our goals. That is all that I have ever wanted to do, that's all I've ever strived to do. And I would certainly ask that if anyone ever had a concern about any decision or comment, action, anything that I'd ever made, if they would simply bring that to me personally. And then if I can't resolve it, certainly take it to the next level. But this is not the case. The backup material that you have this evening does not in any way violate anything that I could find in the law. In fact, before I ever sent a single email or a single piece of information out to board members in an effort to serve them well, I asked the attorney for the board. I've talked with the attorney general who works the open meeting law cases. I've talked with a number of people who I felt had professional expertise in this field, and I was assured that I could distribute that information in such a manner, and so I did on behalf of the board. And you will note that this memorandum from the district attorney's office says that there is no indication that the backup material that you've received tonight on item 16 constitutes in any way any action that would have endangered the board or any member of the board in a breach of law. So I appreciate that we're all certainly entitled to opinions, as is commonly mentioned in this room, but that I just could not let such an allegation go unanswered, because I stand proud of what I do and the integrity that I have. And if it's going to be attacked, I just deserve an opportunity to respond to that.
What you're saying. And
you know what? If you don't want to discuss this the way that you wanted to, I asked you if we could go ahead and hear this, and you said no. Now that I've responded, please don't attack me again.
Attack you? You are very lucky, and you don't know it. You have done things for the last 10 years to me, publicly and whenever, and I'm not accepting anymore. It needs to stop. And you talk about team. I know Terry talks about teamwork. We have no team, and you know that. And you have been the main centerpiece, the two of you down there.
You're making allegations without foundation.
What? Look, let's go to court. I'm going to deal with this in the right way. I am not accepting this. And Mrs. Miller, once before, she sent you some information, and you responded to it. You didn't do any research, and I don't like that either. I don't like that. You are my attorney as well as you are the rest of the people up here. And I like you. And I've said that many, many times. But I don't accept when you respond to her and you just ignore me. I don't like that.
You know what, I really think that I am going to interject, because I believe that if we want to have a discussion or do a personnel session, I think it's fine. I think that this needs to stop at this point in time. We can't be attacking people and attacking all the people. You don't need to take directions. I would ask for a motion, an agenda
stay out of
to
it,
adjourn
and
the
either
meeting.
we can
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn
I
the
don't
meeting.
care.
This is not necessary.
It isn't
We have a motion and a
necessary.
second to adjourn.
And I'm sorry,
Cast
but
your
you
votes,
need
please.
to mind your own business.
I'm going to.
Yeah, I hope so, and I wish you the best. And
This is just not the place for this, Mrs.
oh,
Barber.
what is the place? How do you think I feel? How you have treated me, including you? You haven't been the greatest, but I'm not taking any more. And enough is enough, and I don't care anymore. Walt, I hope you understand what I'm saying. Don't turn it off, Charles. She doesn't tell you what to do.
To do the vote.
Oh, do the vote? Okay.
Thank you.
So
Motion
stay out of
passes,
it.
meeting's adjourned. Thank you. You're welcome.
All teachers in the Clark County School District appreciate your behavior tonight. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Need this last, I ain't working no more with you.
What's going on?
Did you gather up? There's signature sheets out here somewhere. Okay. On the invest and the budget. Okay.
Hello? Ruth. Charles. Do we have it in German yet?
Bill, oh, just until Bill.
Oh, no, I don't plan to. I'm just going to do what I have to do. I'm going to be calling you and telling you, so I know I got to do it. But, you know, this nonsense here is so bothersome. And, you know, something else to take care of.
Bill looked and he goes, I can feel I'm donating it. And he goes, no, that's more than 25 bucks. I said, I'll give it to the school, so I'll give it to you. You got it. I can do that. Sorry. Oh, thanks.
I will. Thanks. Have a nice holiday.
No. You're my witness. Terry's taking my grandson to school because I can't access. Here's his. Yeah. So.
She's trying to run the district. That's what she's doing. It is out of session. Oh, I don't even feel like turning the page. No, my daughter's coming back next year. Yeah, it's just the way things is, but, you know, it still doesn't solve it. I was there in
I don't
five.
think that you've had a chance to sit on the phone.
No, I really haven't.
I was going to throw your water away.
I'm doing
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I'm trying to go home.
I don't.
Trying to go home. I wasn't mad. I'm glad you had to step through. I would have liked to talk to you about it first. Oh, Susan.
Throw them in the trash.
No.
Please.
Oh, baby.